everybody to our program tonight. My name is Carol Lanham. I am the Director of Mentorship for AWA+D, and I am also an architect and a principal at Lionakis, soon to be in Newport Beach. I wanted to just, I think that we do not have our president on, but we do have our incoming president for next year. Sonia Gavorkian is on the call. I would like to introduce her and let her say hello. If she's willing, we've sprung this on her, so she may not be. It's okay.
Thank you for joining.
Well, we're thrilled with the event that we have tonight, and I want to start off by just introducing our moderator. Jenny Fontenot is an architect at Belzberg Architects, and she is on the mentorship committee for AWA+D with me. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Jenny. So Jenny, you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. Real quick, before I get started, I'm just going to share my screen so we can see who the panelists are today. As Carol mentioned, I am Jenny Fontenot. I'm an architect at Belzberg Architects and member of the mentorship committee, and I'm pleased to be moderating tonight's event. It's relatively informal discussion. We'll be covering a few different questions on the topic of planning for partnership, which we're excited to talk about. This is not a topic that we cover on a day-to-day basis or we learn in school. So we thought this would be a great opportunity for people of all levels to come in and learn a little bit about the partnership track and what it takes to be partners in a firm. So today we have Linda Daley, Andy Deeble, Laurie, McCoy, Mitra, and Memari as well. And I'd love to have everyone sort of introduce themselves so we can hear from you first, starting with Linda, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm Linda Daley, currently the principal and director of the Los Angeles office of MIG. I was, until 2 years ago, I was one of the co-owners and shareholders of AWA+D. I was with AWA, formerly AWA Landscape Architects, for about 21, 22 years. And then in 2019, we sold the firm to MIG, and now we went from being a firm, being a part of a roughly 20 people office to about 270 people. My firm is currently mostly West Coast, but we go from San Diego all the way up to Seattle. We're in Portland, Denver, San Antonio. So we have a number of offices. So I also went from one office to about a dozen offices, which is kind of an interesting thing. So it's been 2 years, but I'm still adjusting. So it's an interesting new phase of my career, I guess.
That's awesome. Thanks. Really exciting. Thank you for sharing. Andy, do you want to go next? Introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. My name's Andy Deeble. I am a principal and the chief financial officer at Lionakis. And you may have noticed there's something different about me than the rest of you, and that is that I am not a licensed architect. My background is in business, actually, but I have been at Lionakis for just about 11 years now. Overseeing the finance department, company of about 200 people, based entirely in California at the moment, but looking to expand beyond that. I'm up in our headquarters in Sacramento, but I'm originally from Southern California, which I gather most of you are as well. I grew up in San Diego. I went to UCLA, so I'm always happy to hang with people that are enjoying the Southern California weather down there while I'm baking in 108-degree heat.
Thanks, Andy. Laurie, you're up next.
Sure. Laurie McCoy. I'm a licensed architect, and I have been a principal with Lionakis for 2.5 years now in our Newport Beach office. My role is healthcare practice lead, and I support our California-based healthcare teams that are located in Sacramento, Oakland, and Newport Beach. And I have a very diverse background, but for probably 36 years, I've been focusing in healthcare. And the first firm that I worked for, I was at 28 years, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth as an owner. You'll hear about that in a little bit. And just wanted to thank you so much for inviting me to participate on this panel.
Thank you. We're really happy to have all of you here. Mitra.
Hi, everyone. Mitra Memari. I'm a partner at ZGF Architects. For anyone who doesn't know, ZGF is a 700 plus firm nationwide, plus an office in Canada. In Vancouver, we have 6 offices. I am obviously in the LA office. We started in Portland. We have an office in Seattle, New York, DC. I have been with ZGF for about 14 years now, and look forward to this discussion with everyone.
Great, thank you, everyone. Okay, so to start us off, we're just going to have a relatively broad question. We'd love to hear from each of the panelists. Our first question for today is, why did you choose to pursue the role that you were in, and what was that journey like for you? So I will call on you each individually, and feel free to chime in if you want to jump off of someone else's response. But why don't we start with our non-architect, Andy, for this question. Let's hear your journey.
Sure. My journey is probably quite a bit different than yours. I'm not sure how much of it is relevant to all of you, but I came from a different field entirely. So like I said, I'm from a business background. I worked in retail most of my life. Prior to joining Lionakis, I was a controller at a high-end gardening and patio furniture company called Smith & Hawken that you might remember before they went out of business. Not my fault entirely, a little bit maybe. And after that, I was CFO for a coffee company for a few years, and kind of just made a career choice decision to look at something different. When I joined Lionakis, it was a firm that's actually been around since early 1900s, but had never had a chief financial officer before, but was looking to get a little bit more strategic and become less still a practice-driven firm, but to lean a little bit more on the business side and bring in some folks with different backgrounds. So when I started, actually, there were no non-licensed professionals that had any ownership in the firm. We were only allowed to own up to 0.5%. So part of my journey that's been pretty interesting is I've kind of been charged with overseeing the ownership program and how that works. And I've spent a lot of time working with others within the firm to make sure that it's rewarding, that there's a real reason for people to want to be an owner, that there's return associated with that, and that we get the firm gets the right value, the right mix of people out of that. So I'll talk about some of those things, I think, as the panel progresses. But that's me in a nutshell of my background.
Great, thank you. This does remind me too, I forgot to mention that if anyone does have questions for our panelists throughout this whole discussion, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll take a look at them towards the end for the question and answer session, as well as we'll give you opportunities to raise your hand and speak on camera as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Think of questions as the panelists are speaking. And thank you, Andy, again. I think next we'll go with Mitra. Do you want to talk about why you chose to pursue your role?
You know, talk about a small world. I actually briefly worked as an intern at a firm who did design for Smith & Hawken stores. So when you said that name, I'm like, oh, that was such a great store. And unfortunately, they're no longer in business. But so sure. So my name is Mitra Memari, and Memari actually in Farsi means architect. So one can say I was destined to be an architect, but just by my name. And I was born in Iran. I immigrated as a teenager. But when I was in school and we would read about architecture in our textbooks, and I would see Memari, it's actually Memari, but like, in textbooks, there would be like a connection. I just automatically felt a connection to it. So that's a little bit of the story. And then my first name, Mitra, means the sun, hence my image here, I guess, that the other way. So when I started going to architecture school, I always created this image for myself. And this is a pretty personal story, but I'll share it with everyone, that one day I will have my own firm and it will be called Sun Architect, and it actually would be my name. And I would share this story with friends, with people, and be like, so, and like I had an image of like the graphics of what it would look like. And to say that like the seeds of like being an owner had really like started very early for me. You know, I'm not sure I can say it was fully intentional at the time. It was kind of a play of my name and sort of a drive that I had. And so I graduated in the early 90s where there was a terrible recession, and it was really hard to get into the architectural field. But I worked through, you know, doing volunteer designs for Habitat for Humanity and whatever I could until I got my first job and started my career in architecture, and just like learning and being guided by a lot of great mentors. I studied at Berkeley and I stayed in the Bay Area for a long time. But no matter where I would go, I would share this story about Sun Architect. And, you know, now looking back, I'm like, you know, some of those people that I worked with must have said like, man, this is an ambitious woman. Like, you know, what is she talking about? You know, young, a few years out of college. I made it to LA, and eventually in 2006, I started working at ZGF. And, you know, I was determined from the beginning of having started at ZGF. I started with no title because I think at the time, you know, they were having, as a lot of firms, as you can imagine, it's hard to bring somebody brand new with any title. And the way the titles go at ZGF, because every firm, it's very different. You start off as associate, then associate principal, and then partner, which becomes the owner. And so in my 3-month review, I was having lunch with 2 of the partners, and based on the work that I had done there, I just said, I really think that I deserve a title, and I think I deserve an associate principal title. And this wasn't because of ego or like, you know, because I'm after titles, but it was because of the work I was doing. And I think one of the things for me has always been that I've never thought about searching, or my goal isn't to be titled. My goal is to do the work that goes with the title. Like that's really the more important thing. That the title comes, the title doesn't come. What is fulfilling to me, and what kind of level of work do I want to put out there? So, you know, they agreed. So in 3 months, I became an associate principal, and then again, just through my work, through my building relationships, I became a principal, and was very fortunate enough to, about 2.5 years ago, become a partner at ZGF. So in a nutshell, that's kind of like my story.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'm literally looking forward to ZGF changing their name to Sun Architects. I'll be looking out for that in the near future. Great. Linda, do you want to go next and talk about why you chose your position, or why you chose your role, and what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Everybody has such diverse stories so far, and you know, I'm a career changer. I was 20 some odd years in one profession, primarily publishing. The last position I had was with the Los Angeles Times, and you know, I have a undergrad in business and marketing and a MBA in finance. And so that was where, you know, I did the whole corporate route from AT&T to Times Mirror. And I started out in New York, grew up in New York, and made my way to Los Angeles. But at a certain point, I decided that the corporate world was really, the plans to sort of move along the corporate world was not going the way I had wanted it to go. And so I discovered landscape architecture, and I, you know, in a strange way, but anyhow, I discovered landscape architecture, and I started to take a few courses at UCLA Extension. And actually, I didn't even start in landscape architecture. I started in horticulture. and then discovered landscape architecture. And so I was lucky enough to have a classmate who was working part-time for Calvin Abe at his firm in Culver City. And she moved. She was moving back to the East Coast. And she said, hey, you know, because she was in a business development role. And she said, why don't you just talk to Calvin? He's a pretty well-known landscape architect in the area. So I went in, you know, because I had a marketing background. And so I, you know, started working with him part-time while I was continuing with school, and participated in, you know, mostly business development during that time as a marketing coordinator. And then when I finished school, you know, the whole firm showed up at my final presentation. And then the next work day, I started working on my first project, which was a streetscape project. Anyhow, so it just started, that's how it started. And the firm at the time was less than 10 people, would go up and minus 10 people. So it was for a landscape architecture firm, it was sort of a mid-sized firm. It wasn't a real small firm. And then just through circumstances, you know, I just continued to participate in business development. And I think that really helped me, because that is, you know, when you become a principal, it's really about going after the work and the client relationships. And so I remained that way even as I was working, you know, in the profession. And then my business background also helped in terms of practice management. So at a certain point, Calvin had been talking about, he'd been talking about transition for years. I have to say, it was about like 10 years. He talked about transition, ownership transition. And so at one point, he actually started promoting people into principal positions, and I was one of them. And I actually started to take more, my responsibility started moving more towards sort of the operational practice management, business development side of things. And then at a certain point, he finally decided it was time to you know, bring on new shareholders. And so I was one of the ones that was in that role. And I think, you know, why I'm in this role that I'm in is because I recognize that for myself personally, it's, you know, what is leadership, you know, and it's, you know, yes, it's about titles, but it's also about a certain point. Leadership is not about myself, but about what I'm creating. And in this case, it was about creating a firm. And the people that make up that firm. And that's what I was really most interested in. So, you know, I think at a certain point in your profession, it becomes bigger than your role. I truly believe that. And I think that's when you decide, you know, I think that's when you decide that you want to become a partner, shareholder, owner, whatever, because you want to make a difference. You want to create something. You want to build, you know, a firm. In this case, I had an opportunity to take an established firm and do what with it, right? Obviously in partnership with others, but, you know, we could have just kept the firm at a certain size, or continued or grow it or go into other markets. There were all sorts of those kinds of decisions that, you know, that we could make. And then finally, we actually grew. We went over 20. Like I think 24 was the largest that we were. But I noticed every increment of 5 people in terms of growth for a firm our size was significant. It changed how it changed operations. It changed how you had to manage the group, and so it started to get too big for what we, you had to start thinking about things like you really needed a real HR person. You needed to start thinking about a CFO. You needed all these things. And so, we did discuss, do we grow it or do we keep it this way, And that's when we started exploring mergers and acquisitions, just sort of started approaching. We hired an outside firm and, asked them to just sort of find out who would be interested in, you know, our firm and the type of work we do, and that's how it started. And then we actually met with MIG and decided that was a good fit, and decided that that was the way to go. So we merged 2 years. We were acquired 2 years ago. But for me, one of the reasons for the acquisition, because I think of the three of us who, you know, of the three shareholders, I was the one who was least interested in acquisition. But I recognized that for the group that we had, you know, if we wanted to keep them, we had to give them something more. And, you know, the way AWA was, we couldn't give, you know, we would develop them up to a point, but most, you know, they probably move on, either other firms or start their own firms or whatever. And that was okay, you know, but if the ones who wanted to stay with AWA, you know, the best opportunity for them was to, you know, to give them like a firm. I truly believe a firm that could give them advancement, that could provide them with growth in other markets and other market sectors, even in other disciplines, because MIG is multidisciplined. So that was how we ended up, you know, moving in that direction. So, but it is definitely strange. I think the thing that I have to adjust to the most is that it's not, you know, there's a loss of control. You know, I don't get to say, you know, I don't get to say what's going to happen. I mean, I do, but it's you know, a bigger group of people making the decisions. What I say doesn't carry as much weight as before. But anyhow, so that's my transition over the years.
Sure, thank you. Just following up on your story, Linda, because you did mention you went to school for landscape architecture, but a lot of your experience that you were sharing was talking about business development. Were you practicing landscape architecture throughout this journey as well?
For the first 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
And then I actually started moving more into practice management.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing. Hopefully we can dive a little deeper as we move forward, but I do want to give Laurie a chance to answer the same question as well.
Sure. So my story starts, it's kind of a little bit funny. I originally wanted to be a fashion designer, but I also had a really strong desire to have children. And I knew that lifestyle did not support family life. And so at that time, I'm a little older. Brady Bunch was popular at the time. And for those of you who remember that, the father was an architect and he had 6 kids. So my career path was forever changed to architecture because of the Brady Bunch. So I say that kind of, you know, in jest, but it does have some bearing on my formative years of my career. I'm also a very goal-oriented person, and very early in my career, I realized that I wanted to make a difference. And that meant that I needed a seat at the leadership table, which meant being part of that firm's management team's career path. So this was the firm that I was with for over 28 years, and I started there very young. I was about 25 when I started there. And at that time, it required me to follow the project management path. At that point, they weren't as diverse in promoting people from different, you know, expertise and areas of expertise with the firm. So I kind of went in that path, that more technical project management client, you know, lead type personality. And my first goal was to get licensed, because you needed to be licensed in order to be eligible for promotion to associate, which I think, as Mitra mentioned, that was the first step in our management path. I always also wanted to get a promotion based on my work and performance. And I won't lie, there were a few hurdles as a woman in this profession that I needed to be able to jump over, but I always held true to my belief that I didn't want a promotion because I was the token woman, and I was extremely serious about that. And I didn't mind waiting just a little bit longer if that's what it took in order to get that promotion. That was me personally. It doesn't mean, you know how many years later, you know, things have changed, but at that point, I didn't want to be just that woman. My next promotion came 5 years later to senior associate, which meant that I was also going to be a shareholder in the firm. And we were an S corporation at the time. So it's not really a partner, but it was a shareholder. So my journey led me to becoming the first woman shareholder and the first woman principal in that firm, to which I'm still very proud of at this day. And then 20 years later, I have my dream position, growing Lionakis' healthcare practice as a member of an amazing senior leadership team and as an owner. So I've been around a long time, gone through a lot, but I'm here. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Laurie. I think everyone can absolutely appreciate your efforts and for sticking through it, because it's great to
I'll say, Laurie, that you touched on this, but as a woman, it has been difficult, and I think that that is something that for this group especially, we shouldn't just pass over, because we are still today in a white male dominant space. And what I mean by that, even the space is designed by white men mainly, and so there's a lot of power and structure in place that we have to find ourselves and fit within. So
thank you for saying that. And I was very lucky. I really didn't have a ton of hurdles. I had a couple in school. I was actually pregnant with my first son between 4th and 5th year design school. So can you imagine? I was like 8.5 months pregnant doing my final presentation. And a professor made a comment about me taking up a seat for a man in the profession, that I had a medical excuse. And then, I think I was brought into the CEO's office when I was pregnant with my my first child, and him asking me my second child, which ended up being triplets, and asking me what my intention was. And I was like, what's my intention? My intention is to, go into labor, have my baby be back in 6 weeks, just like my first one. And, but that's just was the time, it was just, they were taking, there was a big lottery at the time, because I actually had to go on maternity leave because I was having triplets, and they took, there was a lottery about whether or not I would ever come back. And I thought, by God, I'm going to be back at work. And so, it was just little things, getting a promotion 2 years later after my male counterparts and things like that, because aren't you committed? You're single now, so shouldn't you be taking care of your children? So, I had to always balance my desire to be a mom and to have a family with my goal to excel in my career. And I just chose the path of, always keeping my eye on the goal and getting there.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing, Laurie. And, I would say as a relatively young architect in this industry, it is really inspiring to see women like you in your positions. And I know that it really encourages others to take that path as well. We know that journey is not easy. Things are not drastically different now, but hopefully the more women that move up the ladder, the more change is going to happen, and it'll become easier for us to get those promotions. So thank you again for sharing that. So we'll move ahead to our second question, which is really just about, what are the general qualities that make you eligible for partnership and why? And maybe if there's any specific skills that you have, and talk about your own experiences in this or what you've seen in this industry. But I do want to open it up to any of the panelists, whoever wants to start first.
I'll share one of the biggest things, I think, and I think you've heard it all in the stories that were just shared. Number one is to believe in yourself. Like that, without that, like there is nothing else. And do good work, and be aware of the work that you're putting out there. I think that's really important as well. So just generally, I think that's the number one. And as women, we're so self-critical. I see this even now today in the role as I and as I'm mentoring and as I'm sort of involved in a lot of these conversations, that women have to be perfect in order to say, yeah, I can do that. And I think men can barely be able to do, not in a negative, I'm not saying like, it's not a negative thing, but like, they don't have to be perfect. They can just kind of say, I can get away with like getting that done. and they would say yes to it. And I think the awareness of that is so important, because we hold ourselves back by this high standard that we feel like we have to adhere to. And it's not just in our profession, it's in the society. I'm not a mom right now, but Laurie, like as a mom, you have to be a perfect mom. You have to be perfect architect. You have to be a perfect partner. You have to be all these things to so many people all the time. And we just burden ourselves with it. So I think the awareness, the talking about it openly amongst ourselves, our male colleagues, to help them understand where we come from, and to have more compassion for ourselves, to not have to be perfect. So one of the things that I have done in my career, I have had the courage, and I don't know, I can share stories, but I don't want to take up too much time. But I'll just say that I lived in a very tumultuous time in Iran, where a revolution happened and a war happened, and that created a lot of resiliency within me. And so whatever came to me, I said yes, even though I was scared, like you won't believe it. And I think you surprise yourself when you do that.
That reminds me, Mitra, I've told the story, some of you who know me may know the story, but I think one of the lessons that I carry with me from going to business grad school, I just remember one of my professors telling me, always sit at the table, always be at the table. That has so much meaning for me. Because, yes, I'm a woman. Yes, I'm a person of color. I come from my mother was a widow, and we had tough times, financially. So all those things. But, because of that one lesson, that one statement, often when I say that I would go to meetings or be networking, if I walk into a room, often, whether it was in this profession or in my previous profession, often I was the only woman and the only woman of color in the room, and there is, for those of you who know, when you walk in and you're that only person, you could either panic or you could say cool, and I choose to say cool.
Me too.
And I choose to sit at the table, and if somebody says that seat's reserved for somebody else, maybe I'm supposed to sit in the seats, around the wall, then they can tell me that, but often most people don't. And so, and I make sure that I shake my hands and introduce the people, and that's how I overcome, whatever hesitation, because I think it's really important to be present. And to sort of make a declaration that I'm here and I'm a player. Anyhow.
So I think I'd like to share a reason, I at this stage of my career, I actively sought my current position, and a lot of it had to do with culture of the firm. I mean, I wanted to be still a principal, and I still wanted ideally to get stock and be an owner. But for me, it was about the culture. And I think to be a Lionakis shareholder, first and foremost, what drew me to the firm was the commitment by the leadership to continue the legacy of the firm to future generations. And none of our current leaders are driven by a desire to get rich or famous. It's about our personal responsibility to put the firm in a position so those coming behind us can take the firm to greater heights. And this just resonated with me. When I heard this, I was actually accepting another offer. I turned down a few. And when Dawn, who's our president, talked to me about this, I was just like, oh my God, this is exactly where I want to be. And so I think when you talk about characteristics or what qualities you have to being eligible for partnership, I really think that at the core of it is this commitment to the firm. And then there's other things, like valuing, your expertise in the practice you work in, or your business acumen, or things like that. But it really comes down to that core kind of a thing. And out of that resonates other things like commitment and loyalty and accountability and ethics and financial and legal competence and all those things. But you really need to have that. And at the end of the day, you know, it's not about complaining about management or anything anymore, because you are the leadership, you are the management, you are the owner. And so I think that that's what's really important. And I couldn't agree with you more with Mitra with what you said, but I also, as an added point to that, is I have been actually really lucky in my career to have to be surrounded by amazing male colleagues that have really supported me throughout my career. I mean, I was a single mom the majority of my career, especially when my career really took a great, you know, growth. And I really was supported by them. And so there are really good people in our business. I think we just have to go at it with the right attitude. And it's like you are who you hang out with, you know? So I think that's kind of my moral to my story, so.
I think it's hard to be in this position and in you know, in this day and age without having male colleagues who are sponsors or supporting you. I mean, in reality, it wouldn't happen otherwise.
I believe at my young age that was very true. Yes, there were no female leaders in my firm, so I was when I was at that stage, that early stage. But now there's a lot of women leaders, and I think it's growing. So hopefully we continue on that track.
Laurie, I love the way you encapsulated why you wanted to be an owner in Lionakis and your understanding what that means. Like I'm right there with you, and I think that's an important thing, is that it's really more qualitative for us. What we look for out of an employee is more about the skills and competencies, and what we look for in an owner is more about a cultural fit and the commitment and loyalty, the trust. Those things are really important. But everywhere is so different. I think that's important for everyone in the room, especially earlier in your career. Just in the time that I've been at Lionakis alone, when I started, it was a partnership. Really, it was two people had a majority of the ownership. When they started admitting more owners and spread out ownership a little bit, initially they gave the shares to folks that they knew would basically agree with whatever they said. And now we have 40 shareholders, or almost 40. Everybody has a voice. It takes 7 or 8 folks to make a majority, and we've really shifted the mindset to an understanding that it's not about having one person in charge and making sure that they have enough votes to do what they want, but that the collective knowledge and understanding and reason of a broad team of people with diverse backgrounds is ultimately going to lead to the right decisions. You know, and that is part of being a shareholder at the end of the day, is you vote on critical decisions that the firm's making and whether those are important to you. So that I think broad spectrum of ideas, but just making sure that we are all practicing the same core values when we think about those decisions is very important to us.
I think that's
yeah, there's also a difference, though, something to consider: the large firm versus small firm. You know, there's that, and in either case, I definitely think that the whole idea of the cultural fit is so important. I mean, that's where it starts. You know, I think we all say that we want to make a difference, but you know, each firm goes about it a different way or has a different focus, and you know, finding that cultural fit is so important. But you know, most of my history has been with the small firms, so you know, it's kind of interesting how, you know, I'm just discovering about the, you know, being in a bigger firm. So.
Well, it's good that you bring that up, Linda, because I think this takes us to our next portion, where we're going to talk a little bit about what the different types of partnership are and what the financial responsibilities are in the principal or partnership roles. So Andy, I want to leave it up to you. I know you have a presentation to share. If you want to go ahead and share that, and then we'll have all the panelists jump in afterwards as well.
Sure. So this is going to be really, I suppose, pragmatic in a sense after what we've been talking about. But so I'm going to go through it pretty quick, and I think just to I really can only scratch the surface in a couple of minutes here, and just to give you a little bit of perspectives, I'm going to try and touch on some different facets, and every firm is different. But as an example, when Laurie joined Lionakis, she and I think met for like an hour and a half just to talk about our ownership program, where there's a correct answer. There's one way we do it, which I thought really admired about her, by the way, her digging into that. But there's a lot of complexity. So I'm just scratching the surface, and follow-up questions, you can send them to me directly if we don't have time for them tonight, but it's really just to give you a sense of the things that you should be thinking about. Cool thing about being a partner or a shareholder in your own firm is you control your destiny to some degree. Although I kind of feel like that way if I own shares in Amazon or Target, I must be helping those out at least a little bit with as much as we spend there. But at the end of the day, it's still an investment, even though it's your firm. So it's important not to go into it thinking, I work here and they want to sell me shares, so I should buy those, and it doesn't really matter on what terms. So just high level, a few things that you need to know, and then I'll touch on each of these a little bit further. What kind of company is it that you're being offered part ownership in? The legal structure, that has a lot of ramifications. How much is it going to cost, and how are you expected to pay for it? Valuation of your investment and what you might expect in return putting your money into the firm, and then just a quick word on or thoughts about what are the risks of becoming part owner, and what restrictions might be placed on you, especially if this isn't where you finish your career. So you've heard a lot of different words when it comes to types of entities. Even here in this conversation, I've heard the word partner, I've heard the word shareholder, I've heard the word owner, and some of that pertains to there being just a lot of different ways that companies can be organized, and those have implications. So some of us are structured as corporations, C or S corporation. You'll want to understand what your firm is and what that means. There's no way I can go into it here, but at a minimum, once you find out that your firm is an S corporation, I encourage you to Google it and see what that means to be an owner of an S corporation. If you know an attorney and want to talk to one about that, that would be a great idea. If there's a resource within the company that can give you honest and accurate information, I would seek that out. And one of the big implications of the type of entity that you're an owner is how the taxes are handled. On a C corporation, for example, the company pays all the income taxes and then distributes or bonuses out what remains after paying the government. In most partnerships and different structures of companies, money is distributed to owners and they pay tax based on how much is distributed to them. In S corporations, owners pay tax on passive income, which means whatever money the company makes, the shareholders have to pay taxes on that, even if they don't receive that money. So understanding if that's the nature of the organization that you're joining and how they handle that is really important. It can have a big impact on the financial impact to you. And then finally, the type of entity can also have an impact on your exposure from a liability perspective. I think we probably understand when we invest in a firm, if it goes out of business, we stand to lose our investment. There's certain types of entities that don't protect you personally in the event of a lawsuit that goes beyond that. So we don't like to think about those things, but it is important to consider what liability you're taking on and what the company does to manage that for you in terms of insurance. In terms of costs and financing, I would encourage you to make sure you have the whole picture of ultimately what will be expected or offered to you. Lionakis is one of many firms that starts selling shares at the associate level in small increments with the hope that as folks rise up through leadership, they buy larger and larger portions of the firm. So understanding when you're thinking about your finances today, what's going to be expected of you in the future is important. And it's also fair to say, what exactly am I getting here? You might be offered 100 shares, but is that 10% of the company, or is it 1/10 of 1% of the company? What does it mean to you in terms of your control and voting interest? Those are fair questions to ask. Financing is obviously an important thing as well. And again, it very much depends on the firm, but an investment, if you are required to purchase your way into a partnership or a corporation, could certainly cost six figures, depending upon how much of that firm and how large it is. So understanding whether there's a way for that to be granted or awarded to you initially or over time, or you're expected to purchase it with your own money is very important. At Lionakis, we offer financing at really low rates because when we offer shares to folks, we want them to purchase. We don't ever want to have someone not purchase because they can't afford it. Not all firms are like that. So understanding whether or not you can get financing through your own company is important. Some companies also require you to put your entire bonus or some element of your compensation towards shares at a certain level. And that's something that's important to understand as well if you have an expectation of your future income, and some of that's ultimately going to be put into what is effectively, an investment savings account for you that you don't have access to day to day. And if it does require cash out of pocket, either for a down payment or the whole purchase, keep in mind that you might need to produce some or all of that money up front. Always think about how much it's costing you to borrow or get that money in order to buy in, and weigh that against the return on your investment that's expected. I'll talk about return in just a moment. But again, right, it's not so much of a privilege to be offered shares that you have to take them, even if it's going to prevent you from putting food on the table, or end up, that you'll retire and have lost a bunch of money on this. That's not the objective. So make sure to consider if you borrow the money to purchase shares, how are you going to repay that over time, how that's going to impact your finances, and try not to stretch yourself too far. And I think it's also important, right, to look at the potential that for one reason or another, you might not finish your career where you are an owner. And so understanding the terms of repayment for what you've already put in is important as well. And I'd be wary of a place that expects you to give them all the money up front, but it's going to repay you over 20 years without interest if you leave the firm. You should be looking for equity and fair treatment. Valuation of shares is important. Understanding how the pricing of what you're purchasing is determined. Ideally, you'd like it to have some association with how the firm is performing. That keeps people working to drive the value of the company and improve its performance. And as the company grows and improves over time, it means that you'll make money on your investment when you ultimately sell it back, hopefully at retirement. So it is fair, and I would certainly encourage you to ask about expectations for appreciation of your shares. If you're buying them for $100, how much are they likely to be worth at the end of your career, or even year to year? I would ask for some historical information so that you're sure that there's some legitimacy to what you're being told. And it's also important to know how the valuation is being used. A lot of firms have their own calculation to determine how shares are traded. And that's fine, as long as that's consistent over time and the basis on which you buy them is the basis on which you sell them back. But you want to understand how that relates to what they might be worth if the firm were to be acquired. You want to ideally be buying at some discounted amount relative to what a big firm that might acquire your firm, if the need comes at some point in the future, would pay, so that you get your money back and some reward for that as well. Many firms pay dividends, and that's a big part of the return that you would get on your investment. It might be an owner distribution, or it might be a carve out of a bonus pool, but you'll want to know the picture of that, what kind of return you should expect over time as a result of being an owner. Again, it's a privilege, but there's got to be more to it than just to say, you hear the phrase skin in the game all the time, but if I have some skin in the game, then I also expect some reward if we're winning, right? And I think that's fair. So understanding how that works, how dividends are determined and paid, and like I mentioned before, understanding if you need dividends just to pay the taxes on income that you're not even going to see, understand the difference between that and what is actually a return or a reward for your investment. And then finally, there are all kinds of complicated vesting and restrictions on stocks that companies use. So understanding when you actually own the shares and get the benefit of that ownership is important. Is it from day one when you sign up to be an owner, even if you haven't paid for them yet? Do you already get to vote the shares? Do you get the returns on them? Or Are there some strings attached, like it vests over 5 or 10 years, and if you leave before that for some reason or sell them back, you won't get any of the reward associated with them. All right, and finally, like I said, I'm going fast here, so there's no way you're going to take it all in. And I think this bullet points will be distributed here after the meeting. But every firm is governed by either a partnership agreement, a buy-sell, or corporate agreement, and that details most of the things that I've been talking about: how shares are bought and sold, how they're valued, and so on. So you should absolutely be asking for a copy of that. And after you read the first couple paragraphs and realize this isn't for you, engage an attorney to take a look at it on your behalf and point out any potential areas that you might need to follow up on. Again, understand if there's any tax risk associated with ownership where you might not get the money, but you'll still need to pay the tax. Liability we chatted about already, making sure that you are personally protected against claims, lawsuits if they might arise. And then finally, it's very important to understand that most buy-sell or partnership agreements do include some provisions that are designed to protect the company in the event that you leave. So I don't think that's unreasonable as a company owner, but understanding what those are, making sure that they're fair is important. So right, a lot of times, I think the ones you'll most typically see are some level of you can't work with these clients or for these clients. And there are usually restrictions on you can't take employees to your new employer, or there's some cost associated with doing that. A lot of those types of things aren't enforceable in California from a legal standpoint. I'm not sure that you want to end up in a lawsuit with your firm if you end up going to a different firm. So really understanding what those restrictions are and making sure they're fair in the first place is a good idea. Usually in California, firms are protected with respect to their confidential information. So if you came to know information about clients from your relationship with a firm and you leverage that to get them to join you at another firm, that's something that is probably going to you'll probably be liable for that. Likewise, employees who you know because of your relationship and you know how much they make, that's usually there's going to be a hands-off period for that. But understanding it, and I think this also reinforces when you're offered ownership to a firm, be sure you want to stay at that firm. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work out, but if you're kind of on the fence about whether this is a great fit for you, you might want to think about the ownership offer a little bit longer. And a lot of buy-sell or partnership agreements have different terms based on why you leave. So if you retire or you move, you might not have the same restrictions as if you go to work for a competitor in the place where you live. So that's an important consideration as well. So like I said, I was just going to fly through that, and I took more time even than I wanted to. I will maybe turn it back over to you, Jenny, and see if anybody else on the panel can do anything with this mess that I have just made.
Thanks, Andy. No, that was incredibly informative. I do want to, just in the interest of time, make sure that we touch on this topic if anyone has something to add, but give some time to cover the last question and to get to the question and answers as well. So I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything they'd like to add. A few comments or your own experience.
No, I think just to reinforce what Andy said is when I was offered stock, I didn't realize, yay, they offered me stock, but oh, by the way, you have to have this big down payment, and the firm really wanted it to come out of your money or your loan. They wanted you to kind of get skin in the game, and then from then for a number of years, every bonus went towards future stock offerings. So I wasn't able to really celebrate bonuses. It was really quite the moment when I actually could cash my first bonus check. So yeah, it is it's great to be an owner, but you got to realize it does take money and commitment and an investment.
Thanks for sharing. I think that's a really good point. And I think that's why we have this discussion, so that anyone who's here looking to go into that path understands that financial commitment they might have to make in the future. So thank you. So why don't we move on to our final question, and then we'll open it up to our audience. And so this question is, what is a piece of advice you would offer to someone who might be considering taking this path towards partnership? And I'm opening it up to any of the panelists. you've given a lot already, so this will just be an addition to that.
You know, I mean, I think this is a great segue from what Andy was just sharing, is to really understanding the why of why you want to, what is it that you want to do with being an owner of a firm. And I think Laurie said it great, because it's a commitment. And, you know, it does take, it takes a responsibility that for me personally, the weight of it was something that I am continuously learning. It's not something that you become a partner and you understand exactly everything that you have to do. You know, obviously I have great colleagues, I have great partners that have shared with me, but also it's a personal journey. To me, I have to make what the partnership wants to be for me. It's not like how the other person or the other person has done it. Because what I'm committed to, what my passion is different. And the reason I'm at the table is because of that different voice. But that there's, you know, a lot of things that, you know, for example, we were in search of a new CFO. So I was interviewing as part of the panel with a few of my other partners for a CFO. Like, if you had asked me 2 years ago that was going to be part of my responsibility to determine who the CFO will be for our firm, I wouldn't have known. So it's kind of, there is a lot of responsibilities to the business, to the policies, to decision making. You know, a lot of us, all of us have grown up in this, or, you know, field where we would be upset at managers. We would be like, why are they making that decision? And so now you're the decision maker. And like, you know, you can't complain obviously about it, but you have to be really thoughtful. You have to consider all these voices, all these experiences, and then make some really tough decisions that some people are not going to be happy with. And so it's having that sort of strength to fight for what's right, despite what some people may think.
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate, it's easy to be kind of blinded by the honor, especially depending on the firm and how they treat ownership, this honor and sense that you should feel so grateful to be offered shares can take you off balance a little bit and maybe make you not think about whether, you know, I think you could shift it around the other way and say the firm should be honored to have me as an owner. So let me think about whether that's something I really want, and not just feel like I'm obligated to buy the shares regardless of the terms because they were offered to me, and that makes me special. And I think that's important both from a practical standpoint for whether that works for you in your life, but also from that cultural fit. You need to feel like you want to be with these people shoulder to shoulder. You can trust them. You'll trust their judgment, even if they don't always agree with you. Those things are important.
That's really important. The part about these are the people you want to be with, right? Because you're all investing. When you start looking at sort of the topics that Andy just covered, that's the scary part of being asked to be a shareholder or a partner. And, you know, but it's the reality of it. And you really have to understand why you're doing it, if that's right. And these are the people that you want to do it with. It really comes down to that. And then I think, you know, the rest of it, you know, it's still a risk, but the rest of it will make more sense.
Great. So we are coming up on 8, and I apologize to anyone who has a hard out at this time, but I would love an opportunity to go through some of the questions in the chat. If all the panelists are okay with sticking around a little bit longer,
Sure.
we can run through a couple of questions.
Sure.
Great. So the first question we have is, did any of you have someone you considered a champion that helped you advocate for you from within the organization? I know, Laurie, you touched a little bit on this with some of the men that you said worked with you in your journey, but does anyone else have an experience with an advocate or a champion?
I definitely did. You know, I had a couple of partners who were supporting me. You know, maybe I'll jump to this because it's related as far as like, you know, how do firms approach partnerships? And so ZGF, you know, again, we're a firm of 700 plus people. We have 16 partners who have shares in the firm. And basically we have 100 shares and it's divvied up between the 16 of us in different ways, you know, seniority and whatnot. And those 16 partners decide the future partners. Like that's how it's done based on your leadership skills, based on, you know, your sort of cultural skills, people skills, like firm skills, all of those things. And so unless you have an advocate in that group, you know, it's going to be hard for you to make roadways. So what I always believe in is to be an advocate for yourself so that other people can be advocates for you, because you know, they need to buy off on you. And how do they do that unless you are advocating for yourself? So I definitely have had that support.
Yeah, I had this support, but I also had a mentor for like 12 years early in my career that really advocated for me and helped me. And I truly believe that I need to give back as well. I mean, because I think you do need to be advocate. Someone needs to advocate for you to move you up in a career path within a firm. And so don't lose sight of that as leaders when you get to that point, that you need to do the same for others.
Yeah. Yeah, with MIG, they have more obviously have more shareholders than AWA did, and they actually, that whole idea of nominating shareholders, whether it's immediately or in the future, and that means that there are people who are advocating for other people within the organization, and there's discussion about that, which you know, it's great. I just love that part. You know, if I had an advocate in the early part of my career, it has to be the founder of AWA, Calvin AWA. I wouldn't have become principal or a shareholder without him and his belief in me. So.
Great, thank you for sharing. I don't know, Andy, if you wanted to add anything, or if we can.
No, I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, and I think they covered it pretty well.
Let's move on to the next one. As a partner, what percentage of time is spent on business development, operations management versus projects and design?
I think it depends on the role you're filling, what your area of expertise is, and I think so. It varies. I think in my current role, growing the practice, it's probably a smaller percentage on the projects and the practice and that piece, which is my passion. And it's probably a lot larger percentage on the operations and the business development at the time. But my goal would be maybe 25% business development, 50% projects, and the rest operations. So,
yeah.
There is no hard percentages because it varies also week to week sometimes. Sometimes a project needs your attention, so you end up dropping everything else. But I do think that there's a balance that I strive for to have.
You could be a partner and owner in the firm, and you're a designer. That's your expertise, and almost 80% of your work is just doing work. It's not. You're participating in winning business, but you're not really doing the operations too much or anything else. So it really depends. I think ownership has flattened a lot with a number of firms and allows all kinds of talent to rise to the top. So I wouldn't pigeonhole yourself. I think it's you really, excel at what you do best, but really have a good understanding of the practice, leadership, and the business acumen, which I think is pretty important.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, it's pretty diverse, and it's a very diverse role, and everybody brings their strengths to the organization. So right now, I probably do more operations, but I would say generating work is a really important part of being a principal and partner, because we have to feed the machine.
Yep.
I think it's probably important to understand how your firm is structured and what kind of corporate support there is to understand what it's going to mean to be a principal there. If you've got a CFO and a vice president of human resources and a director of marketing and all of those things, then you could probably feel a little bit more confident that you'll still be able to work on projects and with clients as a principal. But if you don't have some of those things, somebody's got to do those jobs, and it's probably somebody at the top that's trying to figure out how to comply with all of the COVID regulations as they change. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Andy. And I think that's Linda's point from earlier too. It really depends on the size of your firm as well. Smaller firms with partnerships are going to have to take on more responsibility. So it's good to keep that in mind. All right, so let's move on to the next question. And it states, we as women have to overcome imposter syndrome. And as was mentioned, understand that we don't have to be perfect. How do you know if you are given opportunities because you are a token woman or because you really deserve it? And another question, as partners, do you have advice for someone who is younger about approaching for promotion? That's two questions.
My advice on if you're a token woman or, own it, just own it. Like, don't even let that be what you, like, don't even let that enter. You're asked to do something and just do the best, learn as much as you can, challenge yourself, grow, and move on. Like, don't let that voice in your head of the whys prevent you from growing. Because that's what, like, ultimately, that's my goal, is to continuously grow and challenge myself. And it doesn't stop when you become a partner or an owner, because that's the energy. I mean, for me, that's the energy. So if I'm given an opportunity, I don't care why you gave me the opportunity. I'm going to make the most out of it for myself.
I truly believe I got into architecture school because I was a woman. I mean, truly believe it. It was very impactful program at the time. We had to go through all this interview and show a portfolio, which I didn't have, and all of that. And I really believed I made it because I was a woman, but they cut the class by more than half at the end of first year. So I had to prove myself that first year. So to tag on to what Mitra said, take the opportunity and then do with it what you can. I don't know that you'll ever know that you're the token. For me, it was I just remember a day when they were promoting 7 of my male colleagues, and I was the lone person sitting there that didn't get promoted. And I had a female person stand up, and she was this feisty Italian lady that I still love to this day. And she said, "Why aren't there any women up there?" And I stood up, and my advocate, my mentor, is trying to keep me to sitting down. And don't shut up, Laurie, don't say anything. And I stood up and I said, I never, ever want to be that token woman. I want to be there because you all believe that I'm supposed to be there. And that's me personally. I don't think anybody else has to do what I did. And it was a long time ago too. So times are very different, but I didn't want to be that token woman. And I knew by a couple extra years it took me to get there that I earned it and I deserved it. So that was what was important to me. If I would have been a sour grapes over it and gotten resentful and those kinds of things that can tear you down, that would have been to my own demise. And so I chose not to do that.
Laurie, I have a very similar story where I didn't get promoted at, to a level, and I was upset. I was upset because I, again, believe that I should be. And I got a great advice. And I'll share this with everyone. And the advice was, what do you think that title would allow you to do? Why don't you just do it? Like, who is preventing you from doing what that title would allow you to do?
Yeah.
And the reality was nothing, nobody. And so I think, and that reinforces for me that it's not the title, it's the responsibility, it's the actions, it's the work, it's the challenge that's fulfilling. Because a title, after the first week, you got it, it's old news, what's next, I don't know.
Right. Right.
I don't want to diminish it. And that's not my intention. But
I think you to add what you just said, I think you need to focus on, like you said, on doing the job. And I remember at one point I was I had to shift to one of the other markets because healthcare had taken a downturn, and there was a lot of political stuff going on up here, and I was up against some really hard times with my boss, and who didn't really trust me because of other issues at the top with his own partners. But anyways, I thought, I can't fight this battle anymore, so I've got to focus on what I can do. And so I focused on one of my passions is to mentor people and have them rise to the top. And so I just focused on my team and making sure they got promoted and out of that, all of a sudden I was like getting promoted. I was like, what happened, what my desire came true by doing something else. It wasn't about worrying about me getting there. And so that was a big life lesson for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I remember getting my first job because I was a minority. So, that's my career, my entire professional career, and so I take those as advantages, I go with it. So I guess I considered myself lucky to have been given that opportunity, and what I do with it is, my decision. So, anyhow, I come from a different time, I think, so.
The second question was about promotion and how you approach an organization about a promotion. I would just say have very honest conversations about what you want to achieve, where do you want to see yourself, and get guidance from multiple people on how you can get there. What skills do you need? Are you there? Are there things missing? Are there areas of growth? And then also, if there are areas of growth, ask for help, ask for support. I think, I truly believe what intention we put out there can have a potential of coming to a reality. But if we hold back and we don't share, this is what I want to be, I want to get this title, well, then there's going to be less people knowing that that's what you want and rooting for you as well. Because not everyone wants a title, and that's totally fine. Not everyone wants the responsibility of it. So making that known and understanding the path for it is important.
Yeah, also take performance reviews seriously. I mean, I think that's your opportunity to actually share. I've learned so much about staff from performance reviews. And so I guess as myself as a leader, I take that information, and when I'm in a group of other leaders and I'll say, oh, somebody would love to work on that project or has a certain skill, because then I'm informed about my own group and what they're looking for in terms of, growth and opportunity. And so hopefully you have a supervisor that thinks that way, but don't be shy in performance reviews and be really clear about your goals, because I think it's really helpful.
Laurie, did you have something you wanted to say as well?
No, I think everything you guys said was great. I think there's a difference, I think, in your attitude, which maybe would be my only comment is, I think in my career of supervising and being a leader, I've come across people who feel like they deserve it. It's almost like, why hasn't it landed on me, and why haven't I been bestowed upon this title, versus somebody who's really done the work or asked the questions and developed a plan to get to where they need to be. And they're very, very proactive in their career growth. And it always comes down to having an advocate. So make sure, don't be afraid to even ask for somebody to invest in your future. I think that's when you ask for help, you ask for advice, people are naturally wanting to do that, and then they naturally invest in you. And so I think it's that proactive attitude. And, with a little humility thrown in, be humble, but, assertive at the same time, and just don't expect that you put your 10 years in, therefore you're due a promotion. That is not going to get you anywhere.
Great, thanks for sharing. So again, I know we're over, so maybe we have time for one more question in the chat. And then the last question, maybe Andy, you can touch on this one too, is there a way to research the type of entity firms are when searching for a new place to work? How transparent are different architecture firms on their business structure, ownership opportunities?
Yeah, I don't think that's a closely held secret by most firms. You can probably position your question in a way that just makes you sound smart or thoughtful, and get someone to just tell you outright. If you ask them how the company is legally structured and what benefits they think that provides them or why they're structured that way, I don't think they'd hesitate to tell you. I'm pretty sure you could find it on like the Secretary of State's website as well if you want to just do a little digging. But it's not really proprietary information. I don't think that would be withheld if you asked about it.
But one of the things to add to this question is really cool because when I was doing my search before I came to Lionakis, very thoughtful search, very thorough search, there was one firm specifically that I had been talking to for about 3 months or more, and I had a very nice offer. But at the end of the day, they were not transparent at all about their ownership structure, to the point where I actually had to sign up before anything would have been given to me to review. And at this stage of my career, that was like a huge risk, huge risk. So I had to say no. And then on the flip side, I meet Andy and they're opening the books and telling me everything, probably way more than they should have told me as a non-employee. And so I've gone from one extreme to the other. And then I actually worked for one of my interim firms, which was the contracts that I had signed and what I was involved with and all of that was just a nightmare. And I did all my research as much as I possibly could with attorneys and everything else. I never got a clear understanding of everything. And luckily I got out of that firm fairly soon, not just because of that, but that was a big risk. It was just so much. And I think when you have that much to go through and that much information and so complex, that's a big red flag. But for the most part, I think everybody's pretty open. But I had 2 very stark differences between the firm I chose not to go with in Lionakis. It was very different. So be wary if they're not transparent.
And honestly, the perception from the other side of the desk was I was like, wow, this woman is really smart. And on top of it, if she is this thorough about, researching this firm, and their ownership wasn't actually part of her initial offer. It was just something that, we talked about, we want this position to own shares. So she's so confident that we're going to be offering her shares right away. She's asking all the right questions. I'm like, man, if she is this on top of her job search and what it means to be part of this company, how good is she going to be leading an architecture practice? So yeah, I think it makes a good impression, and you don't need to be shy about asking those smart questions that'll be meaningful to you down the road.
It was based on a lot of lessons learned.
Well, we're passing those on now, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I hope that answers your questions. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists for volunteering to be here today and for sharing all of your experiences and insights. I learned a ton. I'm sure everyone else here on this call learned a lot as well. And just a big thanks to everyone who showed up here and for everyone who stayed a little bit longer than our allocated time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Nice
Great
meeting
to
all of
meet
you too.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great to meet everyone.
Yeah,
So
thank you all.
I think the recording